You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I got a friend in town this week. It's really fun. Somebody I haven't seen for a while. And so we got a billion things to catch up on. We're sitting upstairs talking about things. It's time to get lunch. We're going to go drive and get things. And there's no good time to talk about what we're going to eat because we have a billion things that we want to talk about. So we're driving along, and you know how this is. You kind of have a visual buffet line of your city, and each intersection comes with certain decisions that have to be made. It's a 1 or 0. You're going right or you're going left. And if you pick one direction, you eliminate half the things on the buffet. So there are certain moments where they're just inflection points. You have to make a decision. And there were 3 or 4 of those in the long process of making a lunchtime decision with my friend today. And at each of these places, it occurs to me that I ruined the flow of the conversation because we do have so much to catch up on. So we get to each one of these places and I'm like, time sensitive, sorry. Do you want something more like this or like this? Okay, then we would need to go left. All right, go back to what you were saying. But then it's not the same because you ruined it trying to decide what dumb restaurant that you're going to go to. And I feel like I may owe you an apology because maybe I kind of did that to you last time around. We're having this nice conversation about this really dramatic scene where it doesn't make sense to break tension, but I let time get away from me, and then I had to abruptly end it and put the whole thing off. So we left everything in suspended animation with Nehemiah being in the court of Artaxerxes, and he appears sad in the presence of Artaxerxes, and Artaxerxes is like, what are you doing? You've never looked sad before me before. And then I'm like, now let's talk about what that sadness might have looked like. And then after that, I was like, never mind. So maybe it's something I need to work on in my personal life. I'm super sorry. But it is what it is, and here we are now. That's exactly where we are. So I'm just going to hit unpause in my brain, and I'm going to pretend there's a button on this table, and there, we are now unpaused. Artaxerxes doesn't know what to make of this. Now, there are some people who have theorized that it was illegal to look sad or emotional in front of a king. This is one of those things that you see passed around again and again in commentaries and study notes and stuff on Bible things. We've talked about this before. Every now and then somebody says a thing once and then everybody's like, oh, well, I'll just say that too. And then it just gets repeated and repeated. Nobody even knows where it started. And so maybe it's a thing. Look, you and I have spent quite a bit of time looking at Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, not so much in this season on Nehemiah, if you're new, but last season on Esther. It seemed like we were looking at stuff from the ancient histories of Herodotus practically every other day. And you know what? We did learn things about the Persian courts and how people thought of kings in general here in the 5th century BC. And yeah, to some extent, it looks like there's certainly a certain set of decorum that you're supposed to demonstrate, that you're supposed to embrace when you go and talk to a king. It looks like especially Xerxes was a particularly unstable king who needed, how can I put it, the kid gloves kind of treatment. And so I don't think he would have tolerated any kind of emotionality around him. But we know such a comparatively small amount about Artaxerxes compared to Xerxes, but what we do know gives us the impression that we're dealing with a more stable guy. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm a little bit skeptical of the whole idea that Nehemiah was taking a huge risk, much like Esther's huge risk, and that the risk was that you shouldn't look sad in front of the king. No, I think he is taking a huge risk. I just don't think that's so much what it is. I think the bigger risk is that he's going to ask the king for something. And you don't probably want to do that very often. I assume Artaxerxes had never been asked for anything by his bodyguard, his cupbearer, his close friend, Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah, look at him, he's socially shrewd. He's not a guy who's going to go around trying to cash in all the favors at every turn and really flaunt his relationship with the king. He knows that's not going to work. It's going to make him a liability to someone as powerful and competent and, I think, socially observant as Artaxerxes. So, no, I think the bigger reason that the original audience would have felt tension here is not that, you can't walk in and be sad around kings. They just don't tolerate that. I think the bigger reason is that you try to look nice around kings and that the expectation would be that someone in a royal advisory position would have their crap together and not look like an idiot at work, especially because you're sort of part of the furniture there in the throne room, right? I mean, you have a function there, but you're part of the scene, the setting, the projection of power and prestige that is so much of what undergirds the authority of a king in the ancient world or even today. So you can't look like an idiot. You can't look like a schlep. Well, my friends, what do we know about how people grieved during this time? How did Mordecai grieve when he found out the news about what Haman and Xerxes cooked up a generation earlier, their plot to kill all the Jews? Remember, he put ashes all over himself, and he's got sackcloth, like burlap or something on. He's fumbling around town in that. He's doing it all very publicly so that everybody can see how upset he is. Where is that? Is that Esther 3? No, Esther 4. Yeah, and it's so bad that even Esther is like, dude, you can't go around in sackcloth. Like, you just look horrible. And so Esther in Esther 4:4, it says, when Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. So it gives you a little bit of a sense of how weird it would be in this environment to grieve with the appropriate clothing for grief. Ezra grieved in this manner as well. Remember, Ezra's pulling out his hair and pulling out his beard in front of everybody. I mean, Ezekiel, he was kind of told by God to do it, but Ezekiel, 150 years earlier, really wrestling with very similar questions about the fate of the Jewish people and Jerusalem and captivity and all of that. I mean, this dude's out in the street cooking food over human poop to make a point about things. Grief was a very public display of sadness and also an implicit visual call for justice in this time and in this fashion. And so we've had 4 months that have passed from Nehemiah hearing about what happened to this date, the date that he walks in. I've heard people say this is March 18th, 444 BC. I'll look into that more closely before we go further. But the ballpark, we're, March-ish of 444 BC. That's a long time that's passed. He's been grieving for a long time, but apparently he hasn't carried over that appearance of grief into the throne room. He's gone and done that privately. But it looks like enough of these guys, we know how they grieve, that we can imagine that it wasn't just that Nehemiah made a pouty, defiant face or something. I don't imagine the scene here is Artaxerxes saying, "Hail, courtier, bring me some of my finest wine." And in comes Nehemiah, and Artaxerxes is like, "Hail, cupbearer, Nehemiah, give me my wine, but drink it first." And then Nehemiah's like, "Okay." And then Artaxerxes is like, "What's wrong?" And then Nehemiah's like, "Nothing." And then Artaxerxes is like, "Come on, I know you pretty well. Come on, you can tell me what's wrong." "No, it's nothing." "No, please, seriously, I won't get mad. Tell me." "No, it's, nobody would understand. It doesn't even matter. Just don't worry about it." "No, hey, come on. I don't think it was like that. I think that level of passive aggressivity might exist in other places, but not here. I think Nehemiah walked in wearing grief stuff. I bet he had dirt and ash on his head, and I bet he was wearing sackcloth. And if there was any risk, I think that was probably what the risk was, is, well, I'm coming in like this, and you're going to ask me about the problem, and I'm going to ask you to help me solve it. I've never asked you for anything before, and it might be weird. So I think that is what it means when the text says, "Why do you look so sad? Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of the heart." I'm guessing that both his countenance and his personal presentation either communicated that he was currently in grief in the room, or that he had recently just scrubbed off the clothing and ash of grief to walk into the room, and then the countenance happens to match that. The curiosity of the king, who is socially attentive, is piqued, and now we get a little bit of a look inside the heart of Nehemiah, where he says, "I was very much afraid." Okay, but then verse 3, he charges ahead anyway, no doubt bearing a lot of the same fear in this situation, no certainty of outcome, going from a place of having a sense of what your future looks like to a place of, in one sentence, I could ruin everything, just like Esther felt a generation before him. Here we go. Verse 3, "But I said to the king, may the king live forever." Well, that's a great start, right? I mean, I would love it if people said that to me all the time. That's a greeting that seemed to be pretty common in the Persian court. You'll recall that that is the language used in Daniel for Darius the Mede, who's probably the general or agent of Cyrus who carried out the conquest of Babylon. May he live forever. So, I mean, that's your basic greeting. I don't think there's anything terribly exceptional there. This is what you say to kings at this time. But then he goes on, why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Dang, dude. That is so right through the front door. In fact, it's about as through the front door as what the barbarians could do if they wanted to attack Jerusalem at this time. That's wide open, just honest, it's straight at it. And in fairness, the king did ask. It looks like Nehemiah's job performance was not affected. He was playing his role and doing what he was supposed to do. There's no language here about, well, you're not delivering wine the right way, so you must be upset. No, the work was apparently good. They just knew each other well enough. Enough equity had been banked that Artaxerxes could tell that something was up. So the king says back to him, what is it you want? Awesome. That is exactly the right question for a friend to ask in that situation. All right, I could tell something was up. I asked. You told me directly, straight through the front door. I heard you. Something needs to be done. Their problem became your problem. Now your problem has become my problem. What is it that you want? And when the king of the world, the king of kings, the king of earth and water asks this question, he's not going to follow it up with, nah, I'm not going to help you. This is the humble equivalent of the boastful thing that we get from the account of Herod over John the Baptist. What do you want? Great sexy dance. I'll give you up to half the kingdom. If you don't know what I'm referencing, that's okay. But in the New Testament, John the Baptist meets his fate. He dies because somebody does a sexy dance, and a clown king likes it so much that he makes a big boastful, I'll give you practically anything you want. And then, well, they want the head of John the Baptist on the platter, which was not a politically expedient move for that particular king. He talked himself into a corner. Xerxes, a generation before Artaxerxes, did the same kind of stuff. Oh, okay, what do you want? Up to half the kingdom, it'll be yours. He said that in public, in front of other people. Dude, you got to be careful with stuff like that. Again, we see that Artaxerxes is a different dude, made of sterner stuff, and he's not going to bloviate. He's just getting down to business. The king said to me, what is it you want? Now, that's where we're going to pause this time, even though I think I opened to this by apologizing to you for pausing at awkward moments. But hey, what are you going to do? Time is time. But we're going to pause on this point because Nehemiah is going to pause at that point. The next line in the text is, then I prayed to the God of heaven. Whew. Okay, so he's going to take a breather. Everything has gone quickly and naturally, and now here we are. Okay, well, what help do you need? Oh, ask wisely, Nehemiah. The answer he gives to the king's question will determine the fate of a people. It will determine the unfolding of the future. It will determine how the redemptive plan works out. There is so much at stake. So Nehemiah takes a breather, we take a breather, and we'll pick it up next time around in verse 5. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.